The Exodus is so much more than a story about God saving the people of Israel back then. Even though my daughters, they loved the Prince of Egypt cartoon movie when they were growing up, it's much more than that. It's about how God is going to save his people, Jews and Christians, now, right now, in the modern day, and how he's going to do it the same way he did it back then, by judging both the society we live in and the gods, the fallen angels. Look at what Scripture has to say about this. For I will go through Egypt on that night and will strike down all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. Exodus 12:12. Did the one true God just call someone else a god? Yes, he did. Now, they aren't real gods. They're little g gods. They are the fallen angels, beings whom the true God placed in charge of the nations. But they are supernatural beings. And did he say he was going to do it during the 10 plagues? Yes, he did. The church today misses this. And that is why they miss so much of what's going on in the book of Revelation and the end times. Because they miss that it is supernatural at its core. That God judged the demonic spirits who were in control of the nations then, and he's going to do it again, probably in our lifetimes. Now, the late Dr. Michael Heiser, who was just a great Bible teacher and Hebrew scholar, called this the Deuteronomy 32 perspective. That's because Deuteronomy 32 clearly shows that God judged the Gentile nations by giving them over to these demonic spirits the Bible called the sons of God. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Deuteronomy 32:8, ESV version. So at the Tower of Babel, when God divided the nations, he gave each one a bordered landmass and assigned them to the administration of a fallen angel. And it was a judgment of sorts because these guys didn't do a good job administering the nations. These are the false gods. The real God, the big G God, judged them in Egypt and is going to judge them again. You might say, wait a minute. My King James doesn't say that. You might also say, well, I read this and this other version and it doesn't say that either. And you are correct. When scholars translated Deuteronomy in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found that that more ancient text was different than what translators of the King James had available to them when they translated it. That the rabbi, scribes, sometime between the Dead Sea Scrolls and 1000 AD, which is the Masoretic text that we have available to us and what the King James translators had available to them, that they changed Deuteronomy in this verse. Between the time, of course, of Jesus and the disciples who were reading something very similar to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the 1600s when our early English Bibles were translated. But the more accurate wording is the older wording in the Dead Sea Scroll version. So it was sons of God, which are supernatural beings that are mentioned here. Okay, so Exodus isn't some sweet kids cartoon like Prince of Egypt, but instead is a serious spiritual warfare. God versus the demonic spirits ruling the nations. And the end times are just as serious, a spiritual warfare. And if you're familiar with the Egyptian religion, you will see this plainly when you read Exodus. If not, you're going to miss it, like most modern scholars do. Did you know there was a frog-headed goddess? Isis, an Egyptian goddess, had cow horns, and their supreme god, Ra, was the god of the sun. So, in the plagues of frogs, livestock, and darkness, Egyptians saw their gods, one by one being humbled by Jehovah, the true God. To Egyptians, this was obvious, and they could see it happening in front of their eyes. In Revelation, this same attack on the modern expressions of the fallen angels, science and humanism, is going to be just as obvious and real assaults against the modern aspects of these same gods. For example, in the most recent pestilence we experienced, and I have to be a little careful in how I word this, so pay strict attention because there are things I'm not saying, that I'm not allowed to say, that you need to pick up on. Okay? So, what our society called science, well, it wasn't really science, but they called it science, attempted to provide a cure. But now it's becoming obvious that the cure isn't really preventative at all. In fact, not only doesn't it prevent, but it can lead to serious issues. The gods who have tried to keep control and order over our society are being proved powerless. We'll see this type of example over and over and over again in this video and the next, and then we'll see it in real life when it begins to happen. A great example are the magicians who assisted Pharaoh. Their names were Janus and Jambres. Who are they symbolic of in today's modern society? Well, to understand them, we first need to know that they weren't really magicians, as our English versions tell us. They were wise men. They were magi. They were priests. The Hebrew word is karuim. They were religious figures who had special knowledge given them by the fallen angels that even the Pharaoh didn't have to perform miracles. In the first plague, they copied what Moses did, which was turn the Nile to blood. But what did this accomplish for the society? It made the Nile even more polluted and less drinkable. Then in the second plague, the plague of frogs, they were able to accomplish making even more frogs come out of the river. Again, they only hurt their own cause. Then, from that point on, they were powerless. They couldn't even copy the plagues anymore. So who are they in today's society? They are the scientists, like Fauci and the CDC, who weren't able to protect us in the pandemic and did more harm than good. They are humanists, like those favoring transgenderism, again, saying they are protecting us but only doing harm. If this parallel continues in the modern day, we're going to see these modern day magicians become less and less effective as time goes on. So today, we're going to compare how God judged the ancient Egyptians and their gods to the plagues in Revelation and how he might be judging the modern nations and their false gods. So let's get going. Now these plagues, both past and future, are not random punishments. That's really important to understand. But each carries a specific moral lesson, and each attacks a specific god or demonic spirit. We're going to see that. Looking at the past and the future divine judgments together will give us even more insight to the significance of each plague and help us understand exactly what God was doing. Speaking of what God is doing, we have announced the first 3 conferences in the Last Days Overcomers National Tour of Cities in our Return of the King Tour 2023 to help folks know how to prepare for the last days and overcome them. Because it's one thing to have insight like this, what you're learning about today, but another thing to know what to do about it. So if you click on the link down in the description to the Last Days Overcomers Tour, it will take you to the events page on our website where you can learn about the first 3 conferences, how to get tickets if you want to be there, and also how to get tickets to our online conferences, because we're doing all 3 online if you live in other cities or even in other countries. So go to lastdaysovercomer.org/events. Now, back to Exodus. Also, please take note. When we say the word plague, it doesn't refer to a disease. In fact, it never refers to a disease. It refers to a sudden, large appearance or outbreak of something very unpleasant. And it's distinguished from the term pestilence. The word pestilence, which almost always means a viral or biological disease that spreads rapidly, is the other word. But a biblical plague is almost always not a disease. It's a judgment of one sort or another. So let's look at them, these plagues, one by one. The first plague was water turned into blood. In Exodus 7:14 through 25, God turned the water of all the rivers, including the Nile, the canals, the ponds, the pools in Egypt into blood, and killed all the fish. The Nile was the great symbol of Egypt and their economic strength. Who was in charge of Nile maintenance? Interestingly, it was Pharaoh back in those days. So God started there with their great symbol and with Pharaoh, who claimed he was the god Horus incarnate. In the future, in Revelation 8:8, God will turn a third of the sea to blood and kill a third of all sea creatures and destroy a third of all the ships. In Revelation 16:3 through 6, God will turn the rest of the sea, as well as all the rivers and springs, to blood and kill everything in them. The reason for this end-time plague is given in Revelation 16:6, and it's very important. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, already has happened at that point, and you have given them blood to drink. It is what they deserve. In other words, turning water to blood is a sign against those who have shed innocent blood. Now, in ancient Egypt, what happened in the Nile River? That's right. A Pharaoh had the male Israelite babies thrown into the Nile, and their blood was shed there. So because he shed innocent blood, God gave him blood to drink. See how that works? Revelation helps us understand Exodus, and Exodus helps us understand Revelation. The fact that water will become blood worldwide in the end times shows the extent to which the people of God will be persecuted and innocent blood shed all over the world. However, not all of the innocent blood will be shed because of religious persecution. Many millions of people will die just from wars that are waged. The famines, the pestilence, basically the four horsemen of Revelation, Revelation 6:1 through 8. God is going to revisit all this bloodshed on all those responsible. Now, the second plague is frogs. In Exodus 8:1 through 13, God made frogs come out of the Nile to swarm the land, buildings, the people. And the frogs soon died, and they smelled pretty bad. This was an attack on the Egyptian goddess Hecate, who was the frog-headed goddess of fertility, who was responsible for the control of the multiplication of frogs in the Nile. Yes, they actually had a goddess for that. So when the frogs multiplied and came out onto the land, the people realized that Hecate was not on the job. She couldn't even control her own frogs. They began to doubt their gods. This was part of our one true God's purpose. In Revelation 16:13, we see three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. The purpose of these unclean spirits is to assemble the kings of the whole world for battle against Jesus when he returns for Armageddon. Now, these mentions of frogs back in Exodus and in Revelation are the only two mentions of that animal, a frog, in the whole Bible. In Exodus and here in Revelation, frogs are symbolic then of unclean spirits. The purpose of these unclean spirits is to stir up wickedness and rebellion and take the unrepentant to their place of judgment. Notice in Revelation, they have people assemble and go to Armageddon where they're going to get judged. The third and fourth plague are gnats, flies, and flying insects. In Exodus 8:16 through 19, God turned the dust of Egypt into gnats which covered the land, the people and the animals. In Exodus 8:20 through 32, God sent swarms of flies to cover the land, the buildings, and the people of Egypt. The primary significance of this plague seems to be that it was an indication of decay and death. Flies are usually associated with carcasses, after all. It's no accident that another name for Satan is Beelzebub, literally the Lord of the Flies, Matthew 9:34. Satan is the Lord of death and decay. And notice here again, Satan can't control his own flies if God desires to use them in judgment. Now, in ancient Egypt, the plagues of insects were more of a spiritual problem than you might think. The 2nd century teacher, Hammadikus, tells us that Egyptian priests would shave their entire body every day so that no lice or other bugs would infest them. They did it so they could be ritually pure and could be able to go into their temples and do their daily priestly functions. If they were infested, they were considered unclean. They weren't able to feed the gods that they worshipped with their daily offerings. All the gods would be out of business if they couldn't go in the temples. If there were no priests, there was no religion. So you can imagine how this plague impacted Egyptians' religious life. No sacrifices, no offerings, no nothing while this plague was going on. Again, the Egyptians are looking at these things and saying, are our gods powerful? Are they as powerful as this God of the Hebrews? They began to doubt their gods. Now, the Exodus is such a big deal that it's going to take us several videos to work through all the events that are connected to Revelation. The 5th plague of livestock, the 6th plague of boils, the 7th plague of fiery hail, etc. What they meant in terms of the ancient gods and what they will mean in the future to us during our lifetimes. So click right here to see the next installment in the series. Now, if that video isn't up yet, another video from a couple years ago related to the Exodus will appear until the new one's ready. Either way, click on it and watch. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.